Still, show me your head! You in the hat! You in the car! Stay where you are!
The strong arm of the law confronting crime. The police force.
Right, who wants to wear a police hat? Right.
The helping hand of the law. The police service.
What about you? You want a fast hat? Fast car hat?
But in April, when new government budgets bite, feeling collars will be the priority, not holding hands. Savings will have to be made, but is there also a cost?
If these cuts go on biting the way that's been predicted, if we end up doing nothing more than a security force's job, then community policing will go. Our whole heritage of policing is very much up for grabs.
So, as budgets tighten, where are the police now heading? What could be the meaning of the thin blue line?
Tango 1 uniform, Tango 8 Alpha. We will go to the RTA at Norwich Road. Tango 1 uniform.
Once you arrive at the accident, could we have an early update, please?
Ipswich. A girl pedestrian has been knocked down. While officers help the ambulance crew, the police authority announced their budget. For Suffolk, it's particularly tough. They say it's the second worst settlement in the country.
103 police officers' jobs will go in Suffolk by the end of the year. The county's new police authority agreed reluctantly today to make savings of £3 million. The authority blames new funding arrangements and the rising cost of paying officers' pensions. Suffolk's chief constable says the force could now be unable to cope with any major incident beyond normal routine policing.
I think one of the things I always have to be careful of is not falling into the trap of either being scaremonger or sabre-rattling, and equally not disguising the true facts from the community that we serve. The true facts are that I've never, in all my policing service, had to implement cuts of a severity that we're doing now.
The rhetoric is that this government have been the party of law and order and that they've supposedly swelled our numbers beyond all reasonable belief. In practice, that's an absolute nonsense. Our numbers have gone up marginally in comparison to the workload that we've had over the last 15 years or more. You know, if you look at the amount of reported crime that we now deal with, if you look at the amount of road accidents that we now deal with, look at the amount of emergency calls that we respond to, our demand has increased tremendously. And I'm afraid our resources, in truth, have not gone up at the same kind of ratio.
BL Tango 2 Kilo, can you attend Cornhill in Ipswich? Report of a disturbance. One person has been assaulted and is injured.
2 youths have been fighting. One lies injured. As police rush to break up the affray, a car is put out of action. More expense. It could be a write-off. A youth arrested for assault is brought in.
I don't want you bleeding on the door.
In the end, no charges arose out of this incident, but it's a busy night at the sharp end, with 16 arrests on one shift.
Time of arrest, please.
7:33.
Right, whilst you're here, you're entitled to certain rights.
While downstairs they're processing prisoners, upstairs the Home Office funding formula stands accused.
Suffolk has done rather well out of the formula. Suffolk's got over 4.5%. We're not taking back money for something called common police services. So in total, they've got 5% more money to spend in Suffolk this year. Now, when you consider that police pay has gone up 2.5%, I think Suffolk's got tremendous flexibility. The Chief Constable has to spend that extra money as he wants.
The new funding formula is causing some difficulties. Let me say straight away, I am in favour of a formula being utilised to determine how limited resources nationally for policing are going to be distributed. The main difficulty, I think, is that it's being done with a speed which is taking casualties.
It's far too blunt if a force of our size takes a cut of 103 police officers in 1 year, whilst this government are claiming that they have given us an increase.
You'll be flat on your back drinking this.
Rowdy kids near the Chippy need sorting out. Tonight, Ipswich Police have only 19 officers available to patrol the town. Even before the cutbacks, the force say they're short-staffed. So will the new budget formula, which is based on existing numbers, make Suffolk even worse off?
I think the formula is particularly problematic when dealing with a rural county with a sparse population such as in Suffolk. I think it has to be accepted that there are special policing needs in dealing with a widely dispersed population and additional costs. The formula currently, I think it is accepted by everyone, doesn't adequately reflect that need.
Right, you're a chief constable. You're faced with reducing budgets. Where do you put your money? Do you put your money into crime prevention? Do you put your money into negotiating with the local community, finding out what their policing needs are, and trying to talk to your officers about how best to do that? Or do you put your money into those aspects of crime busting which will impress the public, impress the Home Office, impress your political masters, because that's what you're going to be measured on next year?
Significantly, first in the firing line for this Chief Constable are the county's 11 schools liaison officers.
Do you know what to do if you're lost? I do. It's easy to get lost when there are lots of people around.
Now, who could you look for if you're lost? Who can you look for if you're lost?
Winning confidence begins early. Constable Nick Nunn is with the infants at Murrayfield Primary in Ipswich, helping them understand that the police are not ogres.
A policeman or a police lady? Police uniform. Well done, that's right, yes. Who else could you look for? Come on in.
Because of some of the things the children watch on television and some of the games I see them playing as a result of that, I know they've got a very skewed view of what the police do, and I think these visits can help to set that right. I think it would be a great pity and a rather frightening prospect if the police force were to stop being a community service, because that you wouldn't have any of the positive aspects of it then. The children would certainly retain some of the negative ideas they have of the police force at the moment, and that would be all there would be.
Traffic wardens can help you. They might give you mum a ticket, but they actually help you, because you can go to a traffic warden if you get lost. Well, I think the most important thing is, for the very young ones, is the confidence that they can have in their local police force, and the fact that they shouldn't be frightened of police officers, and police officers can be their friends. All right, she said, but remember what I told you. Don't go off with anybody without asking me first.
Increasingly, policing is being done by objectives, and objectives which are not being set by the officers on the ground. They're being set by accountants or politicians or senior managers or whatever. And these determine how policing works out on the streets. You don't focus on things like crime prevention, community liaison, because it's difficult to measure them. And if you can't measure them, you can't put them in a league table. And if you can't put them in a league table, you can't claim success or value for money. And so those things tend to be eased out, not necessarily for political reasons, but just for reasons of rationality, science.
Cutbacks will hit the sharp as well as the blunt end of policing.
Put me alongside there, Eric. I'll just get along this side and get through the gate, speak to the captain, see if that's all right if we go on board.
Specialist units have been targeted, and the Marine section, established in 1977, has been scuppered. Patrolling 100 miles of river and 50 miles of coast, last year alone the police launch checked out 500 vessels. Her record, however, hasn't saved her from the axe.
The questions I have to ask is funding for Suffolk adequate? Well, the rest of the country gets about, the average is 3%. Suffolk's getting 4.5% with its other money we're not clawing back. Suffolk's got more than 5%. The police pay rise is 2.5%. Suffolk, it seems to me, is very generously funded. What they do with it is up to them. If they've decided they want to scrap the police launch, I'm not going to question that.
Can you do us a check on a Mercedes? That's on a church number 167BXO.
Felixstowe Docks. An undercover team is on patrol. The Stolen Vehicle Squad.
The Stolen Vehicle Unit was created about 4 years ago. In that time, the recovery figures for our own unit have risen from £3,500 in the first year to last year when we made a recovery rate of 1.3 million.
Yeah, it's a tasty old motor. The car ringer is a very sophisticated person. He knows what we're looking for and he tries to keep one step ahead. So we have got in turn to know that little bit more to keep the edge, to know what he's done, and from that identify the vehicle and get back to the original owner or the insurance company that now owns it, of course.
But specialist knowledge hasn't saved this unit. It's being disbanded and the work will be covered by ordinary operational officers.
Suffolk have been remarkably successful. Generally, their crime figures were down 6% last year. Their robbery level was down 23%, burglary down 12%, vehicle crime down 15%. So before people in Suffolk start panicking about the effect on their force, bear this in mind. Suffolk is being successful in tackling crime, and this year they've got a huge budget increase to help even further.
BL2 from Echo 5 Charlie, 1020 vehicle. As regards 105 mile an hour speed offence, A12 Brightwell.
Cuts will also be felt in the traffic division. Despite a 47% increase in Suffolk's fatal accidents during the last 2 years, patrols will now focus only on major arterial roads. Constable Clive Craigie has yet to discover whether he'll be one of the 10 officers switched from traffic to general duties.
Hello, sir. Just followed you along the A12 at 105 miles an hour.
Good afternoon. This afternoon Ipswich will be playing Southampton.
Saturday lunchtime. Ipswich Town are playing at home and Inspector Chris Stokes briefs his team. The 66 officers on duty are the envy of villages across Suffolk who rarely see a policeman from one week to the next. And the thin blue line is getting thinner as more and more officers retire, pushing up the cost of pensions.
We're not a geriatric force at all, but what we're meeting is an expenditure profile that reflects the growth in the constabulary some 30 years ago. So as the organisation grew, so some 30 years on, will increase the number of people wanting to retire. Also, we have to take account of the fact the organisation is one which is recognised as being a stressful occupation, and we have been seeing an increase in officers retiring on medical pensions, and medical pensions are very costly.
Morning, Mr. Cutting. How are you this morning?
Oh, not too bad.
Nice morning?
Yeah, loving it.
Constable Dave Stansfield is Needham Market's local copper. He's been here for many years and wouldn't want to be anywhere else. With a bobby on a bike, Needham is highly privileged. Bottersdale is much more typical of villages across the region. Here, the old police station has been sold off, and the local bobby is a thing of the past.
Just before I came here, we used to have 2 police stations, 2 policemen on duty. When local government reorganisation took place, it was reduced to 1. In the last 5 years, that police station has been closed. Our policeman has been transferred for duty down at Stowmarket, 20 miles away. We now rely on police stationed at Ixworth. That's 10 miles to the west of us.
There's an infirm gentleman up the road. He got broke into recently. The burglars came through his back window while he actually laid asleep, and they pinched numerous items. The gentleman now is very, very uncertain of what he should do. He, even to the extent that when the investigating police officer came to see him, he wouldn't actually let the investigating police officer in the house.
I know there are people who bemoan the passing of the old police house, particularly in the rural community. I have to say, on a personal basis, they are an anachronism today. Our modern police service, with the technology of communications and mobility, means that it's a very wasteful way of deploying officers around the community. I can understand that yearning, if you like, for yesteryear, but modern policing can't be run on that kind of basis.
While Suffolk can barely afford a bobby on a bike, Essex has hung on to its helicopter. It was under threat, but they've managed to make savings elsewhere.
Yeah, it's just lifting from base en route for Harlow. Read the decamp over.
We've got 4 to 5 youths, 1 female, 1 male wearing a baseball cap.
Of course, £600,000 a year, it seems to be a very expensive operation. But Essex has an area of 1 million acres, a coast of 200 miles, 1 million inhabitants. And to supervise that, imagine the number of cars you'd need to provide the service that 1 helicopter can. Imagine the safety now of being able to chase the runaway car, the joyrider, from the air, not have police cars roaring around risking pedestrians and innocent bystanders. Imagine the ability, as we did last year, to save 30 people from the coast in accidents. We are putting technology to make those policemen more effective.
All right, we are in position now, commencing a search with the TI and the camera.
And I've got the descriptions of 4 and 1. One female, one male with a black jacket and a possible baseball cap confirmed. Yeah, that's a police car, I think, as well.
Detection from the air has been revolutionised by a new spy-in-the-sky camera. Its lens can provide either normal colour close-ups, or it can be switched to black and white heat-seeking images. Here, it was used to devastating effect at night, helping the Cambridgeshire police search for escaped IRA prisoners from Whitemoor. Flying at over 1,000 feet above pitch-black countryside, these thermal images enabled Sergeant Mark Shelley to locate the quarry.
We'd been searching round about 3/4 of an hour when I spotted a couple of heat sources in a ditch nearby, about a mile away from the prison, and it turned out to be the 2 prisoners. It was great because it proved that the thermal imaging equipment worked. We worked as a team and with a team on the ground, and it was a very good job all round.
Suffolk may envy Essex's helicopter, but they're really grateful Brightlingsea isn't in their patch. From next month, this sort of protest would bust any police budget.
My understanding is that Brightlingsea is costing us somewhere in the region of £40,000 a day. The contract at Brightlingsea is due to go on until July. Now, after the 1st of April, the police authority becomes a standalone authority. We won't be able to go back to the county council to bail us out. We have to manage. If you look at the situation down in Gloucestershire with the West murders, they went to the Home Office and asked for an extra £1.68 million to pay for that particular investigation because it was so out of the ordinary. And the Home Office said, get on with it, manage it from your budget. And we're convinced that the Home Office will say exactly the same to us if we go to them and say, look, Brightlingsea is costing us a lot more money, can we have some extra? We're convinced we'll get exactly the same response.
Currently, with all the difficulties we have with our budget, it wouldn't surprise people to know that I spend a lot of time thinking, how would we handle a Brightlingsea? The bottom line is, and from the public's point of view, if there is a policing job to be done, the constabulary will do it. Regrettably, currently, if we were into a Brightlingsea today, with the costs of an operation of that nature, we would be bankrupt within about 3 weeks.
You are making yourself liable to arrest. I ask you again, please clear the road. Please clear the road.
While disorder in Brightlingsea concentrates police minds, so also does a new sort of law and order.
Oscar control message, Alpha 3.
There are now more private security guards in Britain than police officers. So does the future mean privatisation filling the gaps left by a force strapped for cash?
We're being invited by the government to consider sponsorships and ways of raising money. And some examples that we've been asked to look at are sponsoring the lollipop lady by putting the name of a company on the back of her jacket, or encouraging car hire companies to let us have a car painted in police colours on neighbourhood watch operations, or, for instance, charging people who have a burglar alarm that's gone off for a false alarm and charging them for the wasted time.
I'm concerned about the Suffolk Constabulary not being the Suffolk Constabulary PLC. We're not in business in order to see some kind of enormous profit at the end of the day. We have to do it within a strict budget. But anybody else that comes along is going to be there for profit. And, I'm not entirely sure that these people are accountable. In fact, they're unregulated, they're unaccountable, and frankly, they're unacceptable.
Come on, look what you're doing!
Privatisation is a worry for the police, but alienation is the ultimate concern.
I've got punched on the nose by an officer. Can you believe it? A middle-aged woman like me being punched on the nose.
Right, Mark, you are. I never thought I'd ever see such a scene in England.
Policing has had a very broad brush previously, where we've dealt with helping little old ladies across the road, getting cats out of trees, those kind of things, metaphorically speaking. When you're strapped for cash and you're only left with dealing with emergencies, then you lose the opportunity to come into contact with people in situations which aren't hostile. And I'm afraid if we just deal with emergency situations, particularly to do with law and order, then if we have the responsibility for making sure that society keeps in order, then we're going to be hated by a vast proportion of the community.
Cuts are not about the police doing what they've always done, but with a small amount of money. It's about reducing the number of tasks a police officer can do. And so what we're talking about is losing sight of what we have seen in my lifetime. A police force that I recognise, which is a police force on the street, people I can approach, people I can talk to, officers who know the history of my community, officers who have a good sense of what it takes to keep the peace, to maintain peaceful, secure conditions for a healthy democracy to flourish.
Keeping the peace is how Dave Stansfield sees his job. Yet, if economies go on biting, he could become an endangered species. But were he to go, what sort of policing would be lost?
I see being a country policeman as having a human face, being able to relate with the community, and I think the community expect me to do that, being a dedicated policeman to Needham Market. And as the old saying goes, getting on your bike and being out there with the public, I believe that's what I'm supposed to do.
As economies bite, the police have had to withdraw to their urban patch.
Police emergency.
The pressure's on. Demand is up, manpower's down. But something has to give. What sort of retreat are the police now beating?
When you move to being just an emergency service and only dealing with things like the maintenance of order or the prosecution of offenders against the peace, if that's your only prime role, then I'm afraid what happens is you change 150 years of policing in this country, where we've policed by consent.
I think we need to look very, very carefully at the way the police service is developing. I think it's quite right that we should be asked to secure value for money, to increase efficiency, increase effectiveness. But there comes a point at which those two demands drive the force to a point where it can no longer continue to provide a service that is traditionally recognised as British policing. And I think that would be a tragedy were that to occur.
Look at them. It's a police state. I live in this bloody town.
What country are we living in? Are we living in Czechoslovakia or something?
Ultimately, what sort of police force do we want? Behind economic constraints, are there political questions?
I've been arrested.
I'm concerned that this government has got a hidden agenda. And I think that nationally they're trying to cut us down from something like 129,000 police officers down to about 80,000 in 10 years' time.
The idea that we're going to cut 40,000 bobbies is so stupid that it's just absolutely incredible. We have not spent 15 years building up the police force to try and reduce it to a nonsensical figure such as suggested there.
The unwritten agenda is to nationalise the police force, to have chief constables effectively removed, and to control the policing through little quangos in accordance with Whitehall's whim and control.
I have never heard such utter nonsense. We are not going to have police amalgamations. We do not want a national police force. We want 43 separate police forces in England and Wales, wearing the county badge, accountable to their local people, having pride in their community.
Nevertheless, as the new police authorities take their seats, some are still worried as to who will be calling the shots. Will power remain at county level, or could it switch to the centre, as it has on the continent?
In Europe, the policing is run by the Home Office, the Interior Ministry, or whatever you like to call it. It's run by a government. Here it's run by a mixture of local authorities, or it was, the police service itself, the Home Office, and the community through its own elected representatives. It was a tripartite balance. It's unique. If this goes on, I think you will have lost the fundamental of English policing, which was policing by consent, the citizen policing himself, the civilian in uniform, that great English concept. And you'll end up with a national police force, a form of Home Office private army.